where discretion is advised. Chapter 13. Realignment. While twilight took its hold, it announced its descending night skies above, as breathtaking jungles could be seen from all around. And while flocks of birds from here and there made their final descents, a calm set in, signaling all around a shift change within the surrounding wildlife was about to take place. Here, upon a familiar spot, two rival cartels were gathered as they listened while being addressed by Nicholas, the Chancellor's brother and his top general. As he addressed his men and the men of their once rival faction, a sense of unease could be felt as he finished his evening announcements. The Chancellor and I will be departing. Ready your teams for departure. You have your orders. With that, Nicholas passed the megaphone to Thomas, who looked at him in approval. Thomas then looked at Nicholas and the Chancellor as he gave his orders to Chavez. Gag them and bound their hands. They'll be coming with me. As if this were completely unexpected and somewhat inappropriate, Chavez responded to Thomas as they each escorted the Chancellor and Nicholas to a more private location. Marquez, Cruz's only remaining general, followed them closely behind, listening to his commanding officer address Mr. Shields. Hey, Agent Fuckhead, the Chancellor is mine. That's the deal. Remember, once they do their pathetic little speech, they are both my property. They come with me. Then, Thomas, putting Chavez on hold, turned to Marquez and gave him a task. Marquez, I want you to find the highest-ranking Russian and bring him to me. Marquez, simply not in favor of the crooked American, looked at Chavez, who oddly enough approved of the order. And then, looking back to Thomas, he reluctantly nodded his head as he dutifully began to perform his task. At that moment, in a quieter voice and stepping a few feet away from their two high-profile hostages, Thomas explained his intentions to calm his worried partner down. He's worth more dead than alive, Thomas said to Chavez, while pointing at the Chancellor as he continued to speak. Look, I've made arrangements with the Americans. They'll back out of South America altogether. They need to refocus in the north and assist their Asian partners in maintaining their ground and prevent the last state from regaining control. I need them to make this happen. Lenkov might be in charge of me now, but soon, my friend, once we absorb the last state into the new America, I will be in charge of the entire American military. Do you really think I'm going to let that Russian fuck be in charge of anything anymore? If Arlo won't stand up to him, then I will. And when I do, Arlo will get his way, and this planet won't stand a chance. And then, finally, we can get off this god-forsaken rock. Unless, you'd like to stick around and enjoy the shit show. Thomas noticed a realization wash over his partner's face. The meaninglessness of fighting for control anywhere on this planet within this new reality that Thomas had just educated him on. Let the Chancellor come with me, my friend. Let the Chancellor come with me, and I will make you a partner. I need someone to operate the South until we are through farming it. I need you to do this. I need you to control the cartel and Russian factions. Once this happens, we can make our move. And when we do, it will be you and I sitting under Arlo. Not that fat Russian fuck. But I need to make sure Lazar is out of the picture. I can't take any chances. Chavez, after hearing this, looked around at the jungle and then back to Thomas and let out a huge laugh and grabbed him by the shoulders as he pulled him in for a closer, much happier chat, seeming very pleased with Thomas's plan as this gave him a sizable piece of the new world unfolding around him. He looked at Thomas and smiled while addressing his American partner. You know, Mr. Shields, I have never met a snake quite like you, my brother. And I must tell you, your snake-like schemes never cease to amaze me. Thomas looked back into Cruz's eyes and smirked while he gave a small reply. You don't know the half of it, old friend. Chavez laughed once more and happily arranged a verbal contract, solidifying Thomas's strategic move. We have a deal then, brother. Just then, Marquez walked up with a Russian soldier at his side. A Russian senior lieutenant, Mr. Shields. He's the highest-ranked Russian officer here. Thomas looked over at Marquez and replied with a quick nod while studying the Russian specimen brought before him. Good. Bound him and gag him as well. Chavez, you drive. As the two men loaded their 3 hostages into a decent-sized black militarized SUV. Marquez watched them as they eventually departed. And as he stood there, watching them leave, one of his men approached him. Sir, we are ready to move out. Would you like us to wait until they return? Marquez let the words echo within his mind as he watched his superior drive off into the jungles, soon disappearing altogether before looking over to his soldier and replying. I do not trust this Mr. Shields, he said, still watching into the darkness at where his superior had recently vanished from sight. I have a new task for you. Not much later, amongst a small dried-up wash, the jungles all around suddenly became disturbed, as the dark Colombian woodlands slowly became full of light. A vehicle could be spotted as it passed through the bumpy terrain with ease. With Chavez at the wheel, Thomas sat next to him, while the Chancellor, Nicholas, and the Russian soldier sat in the back, each bound and gagged. The Chancellor looked out his window and then back to Nicholas as they both looked at each other with a seriousness in their eyes. They knew they were heading in the direction of an American camp. Several moments flew by as the vehicle loudly traversed the swampy terrain below, holding inside of it a much quieter scene as the 5 occupants remained rather silent. Suddenly, Thomas pointed out the windshield to a small clearing ahead of them, now coming into view, cueing Chavez to slow as their destination began to approach. Senior Cruz watched his environment quickly change and became sobered by the American force that now began to surround him as he made his way to what appeared to be a tent. The tent, which Thomas had pointed to, signaled their final stop. It was small and green, and glowed from a bright light within. He noticed as he neared it several militarized silhouettes all around them, every now and then lighting up their faces within his headlights. As Chavez drove closer, the tent became brighter from the nearby lights that had been dutifully illuminating the meager military outpost. As he found himself in an unsettling scenario, he was glad to have Thomas by his side. He knew that he was about to be part of a much wider and broader estate, one which he intended to divide his way in a very rewarding fashion. This thought caused him to relax as confidence swept through his entire being, while he pondered the thoughts of very soon being his own king to these vast jungles around them until their objectives here were through. While he parked, he noticed two men standing outside the tent, each keeping guard with assault rifles nestled in each of their arms. Before getting out, he looked over at Thomas. "Partners, yes," he said, gaining a smile from Thomas. Shields found it quite funny that the amateur before him simply did not see the predicament he was in. "Like I said, Senior Cruz, you don't know the half of it. But, more importantly, as I have already made it very clear to you, I can't take any chances." And just as expected, it was over within a second as Thomas pulled the trigger of his silenced pistol, causing Chavez to fall to his driver's door window. Then, as if nothing happened, Thomas turned to the three in the back and spoke a few words while he smiled. "Okay, gentlemen, let's finish this." And with that, he stepped from his vehicle and escorted the three out, as he then directed them single file into the tent. As they approached it, the Chancellor and his men noticed several American soldiers quickly surround and open the driver door to the vehicle they had just arrived in. As a deceased Chavez Cruz fell from the interior, the Americans grabbed his lifeless body as they began to drag it away. And just before they entered the tent, they watched their fallen rival leader disappear into the forests beyond. Now, and inside, there in the center of the tent, and before the three hostages, were a few chairs placed before a table. Other than this and several armed soldiers, the room was entirely empty. The Chancellor, now working through several schemes he could possibly plot, desperately hoped for any possible sign of an opportunity. But soon enough, him and his men were forced to sit in the chairs as Thomas walked to the other side to address his three captives. Once in front of them, him standing and them sitting, he gave a nod to the soldiers behind them as the hostages soon became ungagged. This, however, was quickly followed by a rifle's head being firmly placed on the backs of each of their skulls. Once in the position that Thomas had ordered, he looked at the three and spoke while a soldier quietly translated for the one Russian captive. The three listened while squinting under the bright lights. "Do not worry. I am not going to draw out your deaths. I promise each will be quick and painless." The Chancellor looked over at his brother with an exhausted expression as he interrupted Thomas's speech. He looked back at Thomas and spoke with a sense of indignity in his voice. "Then kill us, you stupid American. I do not wish to look at your filthy face anymore." Thomas nodded to the soldier behind him as the Chancellor felt an odd and painful sensation within his lower back as a knife began to pierce his skin. This quickly put the Chancellor in his place as he reluctantly allowed Thomas to proceed without further interruption. "You are going to have a conversation with a friend of mine. In this conversation, you will be brief and you will be vague. You will explain to my friend that the conflict has been handled and everything is under control. The Russians maintain in charge. It's as simple as that. Any questions?" And as expected, this cued the Chancellor to speak up once more. While he did so, he flinched, not knowing if he would suffer another penetration from the knife's edge still behind him. "And what makes you so sure we will do any such thing, Mr. Shields?" he said, still half expecting to be roughed up over the remark. Thomas looked down at him as he slowly leaned over the table and placed his hands upon it, looking into the Chancellor's eyes. "Because if you don't, the man behind you will carve a small hole in your lower back and slowly pull your kidneys out. And believe me, your refusal will make many men here very pleased. You see, Lazar, good entertainment is simply too hard to come by these days." Moments later, on the screen of a laptop, now on the table between them and facing Thomas. A conversation was finishing up between him and this friend he spoke of. As the conversation came to its conclusion, Thomas turned the laptop to face the three. It was Lenkov, and he seemed to be pleased with his Russian officer, now in his view. Lieutenant Sokolov, is this true, what Agent Shields has said? Do we have order restored, Lieutenant? The Russian soldier respectfully addressed his superior, the oligarch on the other end. In his Russian language, the soldier confirmed the agent's report. Yes, it was an unfortunate misunderstanding, sir. There was a miscommunication somewhere in the chain of command. But now, the situation is resolved. Then, he looked at Thomas and received a nod of approval as Lenkov began to speak. And Lazar, you and your brother will be playing nice now, yes. The Chancellor looked to Thomas and rolled his eyes. But then, he suddenly felt the familiar knife once again penetrating his lower back. Yes, sir. Everything is in order, sir. Very good, Lieutenant. It is important to understand that the world will soon rebuild. We must maintain our current claims for the future of Mother Russia. This is good. Now, let me speak with my agent once more. At that point, Thomas gathered up the laptop and began to carry on the conversation while exiting the canvassed interior. As he did so, the tent, now behind him, lit up 3 quick times as the sound of a silenced weapon sounded off from within. And while his conversation quickly ended, he handed the device off to the American soldier he now stood next to. The soldier took the laptop from Thomas as he watched him climb into a helicopter. So, how'd you get Chavez to drive right into an American compound? And while Thomas adjusted himself in his seat, he answered the question as if he were reciting an algebraic equation to his math professor. The same way I brought Lazar this morning. I simply dangled the prospect of power and wealth in front of his nose. Not too hard to infiltrate one's mind when the door is standing wide open, he said, cueing the American soldier to chuckle. It was then that the officer questioned Shields once more. And the remaining cartels in the area, sir? Thomas, hearing the soldier's question, looked down at the young man and gave a short and simple answer before closing his vehicle's door. Why do you think I got them in one spot for you, Sergeant? Take care of it. With that, the soldier saluted Thomas and ordered his men to prepare for departure, as the jungle's clearing soon became a bustling display. Thomas, now within his aerial vehicle, the blades above, beginning to spin, looked down at a cellular phone he'd pulled from his pocket. As he placed it on a control panel between him and a vacant seat, the phone began to light up, casting reddish, laser-like glows around its small, immediate surroundings. While this was happening, he readied for departure as he strapped his helmet to his head. Then, looking back down, he watched the phone continue to light up as a hologram took place just before it in the pattern of a computer's keyboard. Above the phone, lying flat on its surface below, as if within its very own separate hologram, words began to form a sentence, and these words were currently being displayed in a subtle and staticky red. Once the sentence had completely formed, Thomas did not enjoy reading the words in front of him. He slightly grew bothered as he looked at the text below him. The words read, 7 tracker systems, dark scope. Your target has been reacquired. Person of interest. 1 Trevor Meeks. San Fabian, Philippines. Be advised, this case has been reopened. If you wish one of your contacts in this region to be notified, please advise. Your request will be promptly handled. Thomas, having watched Trevor burn to a crisp, was finding the words before him not just annoying, but perplexing just the same. As he grew slightly angry, a look of strategic plotting washed over his face as he read the word Philippines. He then typed on the holographic keyboard as words of his own began to form. Satisfied with his response, he slowly took off from the ground as he was now by himself, in the jungle's clearing, the Americans no longer around. And as he made his departure, making his way at the moment further south, he listened to the sounds behind him as several bombs touched down. He then pondered the thought of the entire Sinaloa and Beltran Leyva currently being exterminated. While he envisioned said scene within his mind, it brought a sense of cathartic closure to a long chapter within his life. Then, he looked down at the holographic words he had earlier typed as he grew a satisfied look. The words he had written were short and simply read the following: "Notify the Jaga." It was a beautiful day out, as the buildings all around sparkled with various reflections from the sun, now shining brightly high above. All the buildings sat close together, with several people walking to and fro, conducting their daily routines. As the city streets bustled, a very sleek, militarized vehicle could be seen, while it effortlessly glided over the city roads. Just then, causing dozens of electric bicyclists to part as their formations became disturbed. Everyone stopped as they watched a military convoy rush through the crowd's midday activities. There were about a dozen or so armored trucks, all dark green, while several armed soldiers looked straight ahead as they navigated the city streets. As they drove through the large town, they eventually came to a sizable parking structure as one by one they darted around a corner, each one entering the massive concrete garage. As if to keep up their hurried pace, a sense of urgency was clearly visible as they all took corner after corner, quickly racing to the structure's top. And once atop this parking structure, a view of the city could be seen, as off in the distance sat several skyscrapers, towering over the millions of its tax-paying citizens below. All the vehicles then acted in a synchronized fashion, as one by one they speedily reached the top, some of them slightly catching air over the top level's final ramp. Crisscrossing from here to there, a full circle began to take shape as the nearly empty parking lot at the top quickly became this army's newest and temporary stronghold. And while the vehicles formed their circle, loud engines could be heard above as, descending upon this army, a helicopter-like vehicle slowly approached the military trucks below. And before too long, this slick, black aerial vehicle, with its two jetpacks on either side, landed in the circle's center as its loud engines soon faded away. Immediately, every officer and soldier leapt from their vehicles and kneeled to take cover, while each one of them brandished a large rifle, aiming their weapons at the curious visitor. As they maintained their ground, a high-ranking officer stepped out of his vehicle as he approached the front of his secured and defensive line. He was average height as he held a strong physique. With darker skin and deep brown eyes, the officer wore a very thin and well-manicured mustache. He looked at the vehicle as its engines faded, completely unable to see through its windows. He was not sure what to expect as him and his men were tasked with rendezvousing with the strange aerial threat. He kept his guard as he was fully aware that the vehicle in front of him had somehow snuck past their radars. Then, when in its preferred position, it simply radioed the nearby military base, announcing its presence and demanding to speak with one General Shen. The high-ranking officer, knowing all of this, nervously waited in silence while the vehicle simply did nothing. Still watching the vehicle, he knew that reinforcements were on their way as he didn't want to rush things, allowing the situation to be stalled while awaiting his anticipated cavalry. That was when he heard it, as he looked behind and off into the distance. There, several miles away, small specks in the sky could be seen while their blades could be heard from the development occurring atop this concrete structure. General Shen, sighed in relief, knowing that his reinforcements would soon be there as he slowly looked back to the strange vehicle and slightly grinned. But then, without any warning, the curious dark aerial vehicle made a loud electronic zapping sound as it seemed to pulsate, sending shockwaves through the small infantry of men. General Shen spun around as he watched his entire force fall to the ground as they were quickly subdued, each last one of them now completely unconscious. Panic-stricken, and no longer looking to the skies for reassurance, the general glanced over at the vehicle to investigate any further advances possibly coming his way. But, as if he were in a nightmare of some kind, he turned around and was met face to face with a serious figure now standing before him. It was Arlo Brooks, a man Shen had only heard of. Arlo had a deep blackness to his eyes and an energy with such heaviness that Shen dropped his gun as he began to feel as if he were somehow restrained to one spot. Now, frozen solid in place, the general could not even tremble as Arlo grabbed his skull and brought the general's forehead to his own. As Arlo pressed his forehead to Shen's, the military officer began to violently shake as his own eyes slowly began to match that of Mr. Brooks. For a short moment, Brooks looked deep into Shen's eyes, the general able to feel the intruder in front of him begin to enter his very own soul. Soon, Arlo, while giving Shen a devilish smile, loosened his grip on the military officer as Shen began to relax. The general slowly looked down at his hands as he began to feel exceedingly vigorous. Then, eventually looking back up at Arlo and now seeming to be like-minded, he too formed the same menacing smile. Arlo then pulled a vial from his coat pocket that had a label which read DX4 concentrate and placed it in Shen's as he gave the general a wink. Shen graciously bowed his head as Mr. Brooks returned to his vehicle, the sounds of Shen's reinforcements drawing closer. Now, seeming to be under a type of trance, General Shen did not seem fazed in the slightest, as the vehicle in front of him simply took off in retreat, flying at top speed in the opposite direction of Shen's approaching cavalry. And as Shen watched, Arlo's vehicle simply vanished within a flash of light. A light that could also be described as a very familiar solar flare. Shen looked around, his smile slowly fading as all his unconscious men laying around him began to awake. He placed a hand over his forehead as he blocked out the day's sunlight, while he drew his attention to the 7 helicopters now descending upon him. As his cavalry touched down, Shen made his way back to his vehicle, sliding his hands over his coat pocket, feeling the vial within its contents. Then, a familiar smile slowly reappeared across his face while he was eager to now begin an entirely new mission. And knowing that this mission would be quite the feat, he looked around with confidence as he knew he had the entire Chinese military now at his disposal. While under darkened skies that the early evening had brought upon the desolate community, the vehicle's heavily tinted windows created an even darker surrounding inside. Trevor, sitting next to Kit near the rear of the vehicle, avoided looking directly at Logan, respecting his wishes not to be seen. Meanwhile, Logan sat at the other end. His face was darkened by the shadows around him, as slivers of moonlight peeked through the panes of glass and darted around the vehicle from here to there. And as they traversed the bumpy roads, the driver kept a decent pace as he sat just to the other side of the partition beyond Logan. Kit rifled through a bag as she pulled out a device and gave Logan a sarcastic look. "Half empty. Don't you have a full one?" she asked, as Logan leaned over to the floor below him. He then pushed a bag toward Kit and spoke softly. now looking toward Trevor. "You have the 7 sight." Just then, Kit interrupted as she was beginning to go through the second bag. Holding another device similar to the first, she put her task on hold as she sternly cautioned her mysterious contact. "Hands off, Logan. He's working for Lucas. Don't think for 1 second that you have anything on us. You have one job to do. So just shut the fuck up and get us to the plane," she stated, gathering a slight reaction from Trevor, as he hadn't expected her to be so confrontational. Logan, through the shadows, could be seen smiling as he bowed his head, agreeing to Kit's wishes. Kit kept her eyes on him momentarily before looking back at the device in her hands. "Okay, Logan, here's your ration," she said, throwing him one of their small green cubes. She then placed the other cube back inside the bag and held it close to her. This caused Trevor to hesitate in thought, as he tried to understand the dynamics of the relationship that his team apparently had with their strange contact. Logan, not heeding Kit's earlier warnings, talked to Trevor once more in almost a whispered-like tone. "Did she tell you why you're so special?" he asked as he slightly jostled from a pothole they had run over. Trevor, not sure what to say, and noticing Kit not stepping in, looked to her for direction as he felt far away from any familiar guardrails. Kit looked at him and shrugged, growing somewhat bored of Logan's presence and cueing Trevor to make his own decision whether or not to answer the question just posed to him. He then looked back in Logan's direction and slowly replied, "They tell me I'm not affected by the virus. They say I can see through enemies' security. They say I can see the cattle guards." And having no further understanding on the matter, Trevor left it at that. That's when he noticed a small amount of moonlight barely exposed Logan's face, just enough to see him slightly laugh at Trevor's answer. And Trevor, feeling somewhat in the dark on what was actually happening around him, didn't like the way Logan reacted to his response. He watched the dark figure at the other end of the vehicle grow silent once more, as he simply looked out his window, suddenly seeming not to care and continuing the conversation. The remaining few minutes of their bumpy ride seemed increasingly awkward as the three silently looked out their respective windows, Kit eventually breaking the silence. "We're here," she said slowly, beginning to gather their things as Trevor assisted. As he did so, he peered out the window and saw the expansive ocean before them under the pitch-black skies. What he did not see, however, was a sign of any plane as he scanned their surroundings, trying to establish why Kit knew they'd arrived. Just then, he noticed right where the darkened shores met the sandy beaches, under the slight moonlight, a small seaplane sat in the water, a figure standing outside of it. That was when the vehicle came to a slow rolling stop as Kit began to quickly disembark, seeming to be tired of Logan's company. Trevor quickly followed suit as he couldn't help but look over at Logan once more. That's when he could see Logan looking back at him, seeming to be somewhat amused at Trevor's curiosity as Mr. Meeks attempted to shake off the awkward exchange. He then slid from the vehicle's interior, following Kit, eventually standing up on the sandy beach, only yards from their awaiting flight. He then began to help load up as the pilot reached for Kit's bag, cueing her to speak up rather quickly. "No, this one stays with me." Then the pilot quickly replied to Kit, explaining to her his position on the matter. "Sorry, ma'am. Policy. All bags go below or the plane doesn't move." With that, Kit rolled her eyes, looked back to the car where she saw Logan smiling her way, and rolled her eyes once more. And as she roughly shoved her bag into the pilot's arms, her and Trevor began to climb into the plane, leaving the pilot to load the 3 bags. And while Trevor sat in silence, waiting for Kit to follow him up, he looked at her with what little light the cabin's overhead panels provided. "What's his deal?" Trevor remarked, referring to Logan and awaiting Kit to respond as she took her seat and looked over to him. "Logan has a bad track record, which is why Lucas is careful with his payments, rationing out only a small amount at a time. Let's just say, Logan has not always proven to be exactly loyal to Lucas or the last date. So Lucas figures the small rations will keep him on the proverbial leash. Still though, I don't trust him. Back when they were experimenting with the gas from Darius, Logan realized the destructive nature of the gas and began branching in a direction that Lucas didn't exactly like. And Logan knows your value, and he would use you for his own benefits if he could. She said this only confusing Trevor, as he could not see why they would feel as though it were acceptable to work with such a bad actor. Then he noticed the pilot begin to enter his cabin's front door, as Kit quickly finished her explanation in a whisper, cueing to Trevor that what she was about to say was not just important, but sensitive. Logan used to be in my position, but he went rogue. When Lucas caught up with him, he decided to keep him as an asset and limit his power by sending him back down here, far away from the DX4 stockpiles on Darius. Without any DX4, Logan can die. So these rations not only keep him on said leash, they keep him alive as well. Trevor then understood the dynamic relationship his team had with this mysterious contact. He also had the realization of the dilemma Kit found herself in, as he came to understand Kit's precarious dependence on the DX4 gas. Then, as the engines began to sound, Kit and Trevor could feel the seaplane begin to vibrate. As they each looked beyond the darkened seas, they knew that the eerie void, this darkness above the oceans before them, was the direction they were headed in. And up in the cabin, just feet away from the pair in the back, the pilot now looked over through his side window as he saluted the car on shore, a respectable farewell. And upon observing this vehicle just outside, its window slowly rolled down, revealing a man's face as it nodded back to the pilot, signaling the end to their latest exchange. With what little moonlight shone through, and just before his window rolled back up, the gaze he held could be described as one that carried with it enough rage to pierce 1,000 souls.